I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus.
Stayed on Jesus.
Oh, I woke up this morning
with my mind
stayed on the Lord.
stayed on the Lord.
Well, I woke up this morning
With my mind
stayed on Jesus.
stayed on Jesus.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Listen, while I'm singing and praying with my mind stayed.
On Jesus.
Well, I'm singing
And praying with my mind
with my mind.
stayed on the Lord.
You know I'm singing and praying.
Praying with my mind
Stayed on Jesus.
on Jesus.
Hallelujah. Someone emailed me that you cannot say Bishop Long is a homosexual because he's not a homosexual. He just has relationship with boys. And they, I guess they were trying to, get at me because, I dealt with the issue of homophobia, how he has preached homophobia in the pulpit. So I want to delineate the difference between pedophilia, predatory pedophilia. It's two different things. Homosexuality is not pedophilia. And it's not child issues. So I want to talk about that. I want to deal with that.
But and I'll try not to be long this time. No. We all are familiar with Genesis 19 and story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's a trope about sexuality. And the standard response of the LGBT community to it has been the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was lack of hospitality. And that was the problem. And they go to Ezekiel for that. Except that the passage where Ezekiel talks about the sin of Sodom is presenting God as a sugar daddy and sexualizing Israel. So it's a misogynistic passage. So we can't go, I don't think we can go to misogyny to get out from under heterosexism. I mean, that's a problem. My read of the story is, because there are 4 passages in the Bible, they're all in Genesis, which talk about intercourse, and the verb to know is in the passage, in that same sentence, but it's not the verb for intercourse. So when it says no, this thing, the biblical understanding of no, doesn't have to mean intercourse. But we've got a story where strangers come to town, several stories where strangers come to town and people think they're spies. And the army wants to know whether they're spies. Lot thinks that they want to have sex. And he says, take my daughters. This is the story about abuse of daughters. And just like Abram going to Egypt and speculating the Egyptians are oversexed, that they'll kill him, so he pimps Sarai. So, I mean, it seems it's part of this family that they go to foreign territories and cast sexual aspersions on other people. Now, but the problem is that after he offers the daughters, he gets saved, and then God, as the story goes, turns the mother into a pillar of salt. At which point the daughters are left with the perpetrator, who then incests them, but the daughters are blamed for it because it says he didn't know they're lying down or they're getting up. He was so drunk he couldn't tell what was going on, but evidently he wasn't too drunk to get it up and do it. I mean, but for us, the thought that this is a story about the sexual abuse of daughters and that God gets rid of the mother so that the father can incest the daughters is so frightening. We'd rather say it's about homosexuality. And the problem that I have in dealing with LGBT folk about this is they want to hold on to this sense that, well, it really isn't homosexuality, it's really gang rape, and that's different. I mean, it's about the abuse of daughters, and we don't want to deal with this aspect of it, and therefore, they're still holding on to ways of keeping sexuality in the negative realm. You know, that's why we think Mary Magdalene, she was possessed of 7 demons. We think that was sex, right? It may have been her 7 teenagers that were driving her crazy, you know. But again, you know, this conflation of abuse with same-gender sex, such that we can't develop a healthy view of sexuality because we're so caught up. And you know, and I was at Kathy Martin's church doing Song of Solomon, and we were dealing with this passage, and they finally figured out it was about oral sex performed on a woman. And I said, now what's the gender of the speaker? And they said, male. I said, how do we know that? I said, because they're having sex. I said, yeah, so? Well, they having oral sex. So I said, y'all lesbians don't do this? Now, the first person in Hebrew, the first person, you can't tell whether it's masculine or feminine. And I wanted to ask them, what have we done to your spirituality that we have taught you to read yourself out of the text when you don't have to? That this book could be read as a queer book, the Song of Solomon. And the Song of Songs, which is Solomon, let him kiss me with the kisses of his lips. Is Solomon the one that wanted to be kissed by him? But we're so programmed that it's got to be heteronormative that even when the text allows for a same-gender reading, we don't want to hear that because we want God to be straight. Even same-gender loving folk want a straight God because the feeling is that if God ain't straight, then God can't help me because only straight people have. That's why black folk don't want a black Jesus. So we really think that white folk are the only powerful people. And women don't want the goddess because women are trained that only men have power. And this, you know, we keep taking these ideologies and keeping ourselves locked into stuff that we don't have to be locked into.
So what you're saying is a lot of what we have done and what we continue to do with the Bible is make it a book that is oppressive. Well, yeah. And we internalize that oppression, and when liberation comes, we still don't want it.
And I think it was intended to be that. It was intended. Those are the books they chose were the ones that supported. I mean, who are Jesus's main opponents? They're the Pharisees and Sadducees, right? Mm-hmm. They ain't Rome. Rome was the one that killed them. So this teaches us we are our worst enemies.
Ooh. I want to make a point on a slightly different than what you were talking about, in that making sure to reiterate that homosexuality is not a disorder. It is not diagnosable. It is not something that you can be treated for. It is not something that, in the case of sexual assault and rape and abuse, that we should be even caring one way or another, whether it was same gender or opposite gender. It's abuse. Pedophilia, that is deviant sexual behavior. That is diagnosable. Being attracted as an adult to a prepubescent child and being sexually aroused, that's a sexually deviant diagnosable disorder. Homosexuality is not the same. Now, interestingly enough, though, homophobia, and there's several other words for it, that can also be looked at as a diagnosis. As we start to look at the DSM, the diagnostic criteria for psychology, we're looking at new books coming out in the upcoming years that are actually going to be looking at homophobia as something that we can look at as a disorder. But homosexuality is not. And I think that to get lost in that kind of language when we're talking about a child who is taken advantage of, whether we say child, whether we say adolescent, an individual who's taken advantage of sexually, it does not matter the gender of his assailant. The point is that he was abused. He feels that. We don't know all of the details, but what we do know is that this has affected him internally enough that it took all this time to say something. And now that he's saying it, people are looking at him going, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you come out earlier? What's your problem? What's going on inside your head that you would even remotely try and put this on somebody else? That is the issue that we need to look at when we're looking at the psychology of sexual abuse. And taking the labels bisexuality and homosexuality and trying to figure those out is a waste of time because it's allowing the victim to continue to be victimized, and that's a problem.
And unfortunately, the church as an institution is so often behind the times when it comes to the consensus of the scientific and psychological communities. And the churches, perhaps some of that may be due to an anti-intellectual bias in our churches, but it's also this wanting to hang on to a tradition. And we even still have churches that are having a hard time coming to grips with modern science, although we use our computers and our phones every day that are a result of our understanding of our world. They still hold on to a worldview that doesn't make any sense anymore. And so that's an issue with churches, and we need to really start to address this issue of homosexuality as not being a disorder, but just the way it is a gift of God, that's the way God created you.
Pastor Barry. I also want to say that when it comes to homosexuality and people talking about whether it was same-sex rape or same-sex, did the person say no? Did he really not want it? When there is a power differential like there is in the church, like there is in families, there is not the opportunity oftentimes to say no, to say I don't want it. And so when that power differential is used and control is the motor, not sex, then we're not talking about sexuality, we're talking about assault. And that needs to, I think, be really looked at when we're talking about the church and sexuality, when we're talking about it in our homes and in our families and outside of our homes. People don't always have the opportunity to say no. That does not mean that they were not assaulted, that they were not taken advantage of, and that they were not abused.